All right, this is Masters of Podcasting. We're going to be talking about episode 3 today, The Excitement of Release. I'm Conley.
And I'm Melissa.
Woo, we're back.
We're back. We're back before you leave the country.
Hey, I gotta get something crazy going here.
Yeah.
So, I think one of the things that you brought up, which is really interesting, was Libby and Joy's storyline.
Mm-hmm.
Just because when we talked afterward, you brought up a point which I had kind of considered but not really explored fully. And that was that when Libby was talking to Paul right at the very end, the way that those scenes were framed, it almost was very sinister, just the lighting and the darkness and the mood. And you thought that maybe it could be a possible case of spousal abuse instead of some freak accident.
You know, and I think a lot of people felt that way because that got kind of passed around among the reviews and the commenters. But I remember thinking while the episode was airing, Libby coming into the house, you know, starting with her looking out the window at the running car with the door open and very slowly pulling in tight on her, it started to feel like editing and framing from a horror movie, from something, you know, and I kept expecting there to be like a jump scare or something. And then especially after Paul leaves the house, Libby keeps looking around the room, and it's almost as if they deleted some moment, like they cut some little fragment of it that was like, oh, she sees something weird and suspicious on the floor. I kept expecting her to look over and see like blood all over the furniture or something.
And see, I kind of, to a point, was expecting it to be spousal abuse, only I was expecting it to be, you know, she got the apartment, she told him too soon, and he beat her up, and she showed up at Libby and Bill's, or whatever. But you're right, the way that scene was framed, it was very Hitchcock. I was kind of expecting her to, like, just grab a random piece of paper, not necessarily a big clue, but just sort of grab something of theirs and go back to her house and have this weird, significant moment with it. I don't know.
Yeah, it was kind of telling in Joy's conversation with Libby about, you know, at the dinner table, about their plans, and Joy says something like, you know, you have children, or Libby says, I have children, I can't leave my family, and that kind of implies that Joy and Paul don't have any children. Which,
I think that was meant to imply that, yeah.
For the time would have been a bit of a, you know, nowadays it's nothing, no big deal, but at the time it would have been kind of a marker, and Libby would have lived through feeling this way, that the couple, you know, that they have problems or that there's something wrong with them.
And that's probably a good reason to think why they might have bonded, especially, you know, when did we get a timeline on when they moved in, or was it?
I think Libby mentioned in was it the previous episode? Yeah, I think so. When Bill comes home, she says something like, oh, Johnny was hanging out with the neighbors and was helping them clean their gutters and earned a little bit of money.
Right.
We're having dinner with them. They asked Johnny if I'm a single mother.
That's right. They're the single mother people. I couldn't remember if that was them or another
I think
house.
that's them.
Okay. Did you want to talk also about Tessa and her boyfriend and the shitty, unfortunate incident?
Well, before we talk about that, I want to kind of it was interesting that Tessa, very much in teenager fashion, but I think this was really well pulled off by this show and by the dialogue and the writers. She presents one face to her mother, that of this very disaffected, irritated teenager who doesn't want anything to do with her mom. Her mom's so embarrassing. Her mom's work is just disgusting, and it's alienating her at school. Everyone's abandoned her. And then it cuts to her at school, and she's parading around. And that's not to imply that she deserved anything in any way, but she's actively carrying around this, you know, salacious book, and she's reading or attempting to read passages from it aloud. And it's this interesting juxtaposition between what she presents to her mother and then the story of her reality at school, of kind of almost playing this game in a way of coming across as more dangerous and more experienced than she really is. I just thought that was interesting. And it felt I guess, realistic as a teenager.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it was well done because, I mean, I think all teenagers kind of want to pretend that they're worldly and cool and whatever, but for her especially, I think she pulled it off very well. Not as far as like the acting goes and the disaffecting attitude, but I don't know. I kind of liked it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the scenes with Tessa happened right around the time that Bill went to the cocktail party. So it was just kind of like a chain reaction. I think when we were watching the episode live, I think we were all kind of sitting there saying to ourselves, oh, and now let's see what else can go wrong. And then it went really horribly wrong.
Well, I remember a few days before the episode, you and I had talked, and that actress had given an interview in which she indicated that, you know, maybe something darker was coming down the line for Tessa as far as storyline goes. But... And I have to say, this is one of the things that I thought of the morning after the episode. I was thinking about other shows that have done this kind of storyline, either with a female character or with a young female character. Do you think we've avoided the Game of Thrones problem here?
See, I don't know. I don't know if it was sexual assault told for the sake of doing something shocking, because in a way and this is going to come across as very clinical sounding, but in a way it kind of serves the greater storyline because the show itself is about sex and about people's reactions to sex. So there's a lot of character and storyline to explore there as far as the writers are concerned, because that's going to impact the rest of her entire life and her maturity and development into a sexually active adult. I mean, that's going to have a huge impact on her personality and her character.
Yeah, and especially because this season has focused and is focusing a lot on sexual dysfunction and, things that happen when you're of a very impressionable age. I definitely think you're right that it does tie into the story, so it's not just, here's this shocking thing that's happening. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, too, I think that we got to see a lot more of that, the fallout and the emotion, that held for Tessa, as opposed to, oh no, here's what happened when this boy did a terrible thing.
Yeah, it was, the focus was very much off. I don't even know the guy's name. That's how little he matters. Yeah, it focused on her immediate, trying to get the vomit out of her dress and huddled over the sink and sobbing in the mirror, but it also showed kind of what's going to be coming down the line as far as how she's going to interact with her mother from now on, how she's going to react at school. And notice how we never saw a single scene of people like avoiding her or, I don't know.
Yeah,
reacting to her apart from this one guy. So I'll be interested to see more like kind of how Tessa navigates high school and, friendships and any remaining friendships that she might have. Not like remaining like that she'll have been abandoned as a result of fallout from this incident, but just kind of the general atmosphere. I'd like to see more of how she interacts with other people.
Yeah, because to my mind, she, we only got a certain amount of time with her, but she didn't seem like a complete pariah in that, people were running to get away from her or anything. But also, to my mind, she kind of seemed like the type who maybe, other than to get what's-his-face's attention in, innocuous ways, it didn't seem like she was really trying to make herself stand out other than just kind of misbehaving to the teachers and, talking with this boy about the sex book that her mom wrote. Do you want to talk about poor Barton?
I really don't have very much to say about Barton, apart from the fact that I really hope he comes on board with Bill, because clearly he is not, his job, he's getting snickered about behind his back, and that's not a good situation. Plus, I really don't see much of a future for him, because it's already become pretty repetitive, for Barton to only be introduced so that Bill can, use his his social connections to try to get an in somewhere and then throw food on somebody or down somebody's throat and then storm off. Like Barton is getting a little typecast inside of Bill's little dramatic plays, and Barton needs something else to do.
Barton just needs to stop getting people gin and tonics. Like
that, he really does.
That maybe is plan
A. Yeah.
I guess not the most notable part about that storyline for me, besides the fact that he is living on an Egyptian river, was just that it was really kind of sad, and not in a tragic way, but almost in a pathetic way, just because, you know, here's this person who, like, obviously has been going through so much upheaval, and for whatever reason doesn't choose to see that, okay, the entire rest of the faculty at this school that I was once provost over is laughing at me. I'm getting people gin and tonics and, you know, pretending not to notice that they have such contempt. And, you know, my oldest friend only pops up into my life to ask me for favors and get dinner, you know, with my weird girlfriend who he doesn't like. I don't know. There's something kind of, like, poignant about that I don't know. I'm just interested to see where that goes, even though he hasn't really had a lot to do in the past couple seasons as far as he and Bill go.
Well, and I'm hoping that he doesn't wind up just being like a case study for the type of research that Bill's going to undertake down the road, because he really kind of hangs around as a totem of that, you know, eventually this is going to happen, and the only reason we keep Barton around is so that one day we can have, you know, kind of a dramatic story tale there.
Right.
But anyway, let's talk a little bit about Bill making all the phone calls. The little details in that scene were great. Him with the script that Betty drew up and following it word for word. Yeah. He only wants validation from Washu. He only wants his daddy to love him, and daddy's never going to love you, Bill.
Sorry, bud.
Not even after he's dead. I think the only connection that Washu has to Bill Masters, like the real one now, is I think there's a tiny little like bench somewhere on campus or a cement alcove that has his name on it, and that's. I think that I could be wrong. It's like they don't really like to promote the fact that he worked there.
There's probably a placard there, and that's about it.
Yeah, something like that. Also, well, let's see. Let's go ahead and talk about Jenny and Betty working those investors around. Now that since we mentioned Bill in the textbook.
Of my dreams.
Yeah, that was great. I don't know how they managed to pop up to, I'm guessing, Chicago for the night, because the Playboy Mansion or the Playboy Club was based in Chicago for several years. I don't know when the California mansion was opened, but yeah, they just were on all kinds of adventures and calls.
Maybe Hef flew them up on his private plane.
Maybe. But the bit about the investors was it was real life that Hugh Hefner wound up bankrolling them for quite a bit of time, and when they were tight on cash, he would just kind of hand them a check, and he did have them submit like a weekly column that they would, it was sort of like an advice column type thing, or like a real life, I don't know, kind of breezy layperson's, you know, weekly interest thing in Playboy magazine, which is, of course, well known for having a lot of good short story authors and famous people like that. But it's an interesting choice on the writer's part to have Bill turn down Hugh Hefner because he thinks he's too salacious or something, given that the real life Bill went ahead and went with him. So I wonder if maybe they will actually go to Hef, you know, at some point later in the season after the Dan Logan thing presumably, I don't know, falls through. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that happening. And I kind of wonder too if they're trying to set up a lot of like the financial straits storylines that you see later in the biography.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they are not going to have years and years and years to drag that out. So maybe they're just trying to get that set up as soon as possible, so it's at least present in people's minds.
But they very clearly presented, it was very much like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So Ginny and Betty go to see the smarmy little vibrator salesman from Ocean's 11, the little techie geek guy with the funny voice. What a great character actor he is. And so that's not good enough. So they go and they see Hugh Hefner, and he's got a very good deal for them. And that's wonderful and perfect. And they go and they see Dan Logan, and he's a smarmy, slimy sleazeball, but he talks a big game, and that's the one that Bill decides to go with, having not met this man in person. He picks the wrong one.
I must meet this man.
But I think Dan is he's presenting the third option, the in-between. It's not as crass and, something that you'd buy in the back of a weird magazine as what the vibrator salesman was pitching, but it's also not as immediately, like, outrageously lurid in the sense that it's in the national conversation the way Hugh Hefner would have been. He's kind of this respectable-ish, above the table, at least on paper. In person, less so, I think.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah. Do we want to talk about the conversation that he had with them in their offices and Ginny's reaction?
Yes. So you had a different take on this than I did, I think.
I thought she was disgusted because she was mad that Bill picked him, but I also think she managed to make it come across as very ambiguous because everyone seems to think, oh, well, she was deeply aroused by him, and this just really got her going, this stuff about, I want you, I have to have you, all this stuff. I think Ginny's a little savvier than that, but I also think maybe she was experiencing a flashback to the end of season 1. That very careful dialogue, I can't live without you. That had to have been a bit of a flashback for her.
Well, and my take on it was, I guess, somewhat closer to the majority in that, I thought it did affect her in some fashion, but I didn't necessarily think that she was hot and bothered for sleazy perfume guy.
Mm-hmm.
I was sitting there, watching her body language and different things, and it seemed like she was definitely affected, but she also kept kind of glancing at Bill a little bit, so that was what I was picking up.
Okay.
So that, to me, that was the natural progression of that scene into the next scene where she's like, okay, yeah, I could be up for some sex again.
Which is such a total turnaround from the start of the episode. What a nice set of bookends, which... Curious, I think they're leading kind of double lives, and maybe that's an obvious thing to say, but at the start of the episode, she is clearly not into it. Like, she's just got this morose look on her face, and she's trying to avoid him. She wants to turn the lights out. She doesn't want to look at this. She doesn't want to know what's going on. She's tolerating it. It's very reluctant in her body language and her reaction and her dialogue, and she's almost relieved when she has to go take care of the baby. And then at the end of the episode, she's totally turned around. She's up for it. Hello again.
I guess that's part of what kind of cracked me up about it was, I think you mentioned earlier that Bill, throughout this episode, was just super shitty to her.
Mm-hmm.
Except for, those few moments in bed when he was just sort of like, all right, I've missed you so much. I must be sweet to you until we can get this done.
Yeah.
But no, I kind of actually really like that. I know I mentioned earlier that I was hoping at the beginning of the season that, Bill would get super hot and bothered for Prego Jenny, or I don't know why. I just wanted that to happen.
Hey, you do you.
It didn't, and the dream must die, so I'm just glad that we had this.
We had these little moments. And of course it was adorable that she asked him to hang around, and he stayed and felt like a family for the first time.
What cracked me up, though, was that hand on his thigh. Like,
but
I don't know.
It was kind of like it would have been such a total shift from Libby, who has been so desperate for children, almost in a in an obviously culturally influenced or pressured kind of way. You know, she feels like she's expected to have children, but also you get the sense that she's so into having children that it's almost like it neuters her in a way. I don't know. Maybe I may not be explaining that right, but
no, I think I understand because obviously, like, even before she had her children, she was saying, you know, she wanted to give like so much for herself to her children, and she really wanted them to be her first priority, and she put a lot of pressure on Bill. And
Libby's
to make that happen.
Libby's approach to children is distinctly, I don't know,
Victorian?
Libby's approach to children is rather Victorian. It's almost like she wants them in a way to validate herself. Ginny is essentially doing the same thing. She wants to validate that she's a good mother, but because she is more experienced and calmer, I guess because she's more, I don't know, permissive, or she just takes to it differently. For whatever reason, maybe it's just because he's so attracted to her, Ginny's methods just seem more reassuring. It's as if she's laying there holding onto this baby, which is laying between the two of them. And visually, this should inspire, you know, the audience to think, oh, this baby's going to come between them. Their relationship is over. But instead, her arm is underneath the baby and she's still touching him. And it's still kind of like, yeah, I really love this baby and I'm so glad she's here. But, you know, it's okay. I'm still here. You know, you're here too. And that's okay, and we're all here together, and that's okay.
Well, I think part of it, too, is that, you know, Libby, even before all of the many events of the last couple of seasons, has always been a very anxious person, particularly about having children and being a good mother and making sure that Bill is a good father. And so I think it's part of, you know, two anxious people in a house, multiplied with baby stress, multiplied with the fact that they never had a good sex life to begin with.
Yeah.
Like, I think it kind of, like, that whole thing just blew out. And so kind of the same with him and Virginia, in a sense.
I think you've explained it the way I could not. Libby's approach to parenting is just so high stakes, high pressure. Whereas for Virginia, even though it is high stakes because she wants to do a good job on this mulligan that she's finally getting, she's just so much more low-key about it in that moment. You know, she doesn't ask a million questions about, oh, should I do this? You know, should I be doing this? Is this the way it needs to be? Whereas I think Libby comes across as the kind of person who would just be anxious and want to manage every aspect of it in a way.
Right.
From what we've seen of her parenting.
Right.
So, Jane, it turns out, is Lester's wife.
I'm kind of relieved. I thought it was going to be Betsy Brandt. And as much as I love Betsy Brandt, I did not want those two to get married.
It continues to be weird and surreal and really funny that it's like certain characters just keep trading off seasons with each other. It's like season 1 is Jane, season 2 is Barbara, season 3 is Jane, and we just dance around and trade places. So I
don't know if I can handle more Barbara, though. I'm going to be honest about that.
She was nerve-wracking in some ways.
I don't know. Jane and Lester, I still root for those crazy kids. I do.
I don't know if I have much faith in them. I want to, but because Lester came, you know, reassured her by repeating what Betty said, I don't know that I need to see more of them together. I need to see these awful children that Lester has such a problem with. Like I really want to know the backstory there, because that really was like, wow. That came out of nowhere.
Like a Parks and Rec thing where she had like triplets or quintuplets or something.
Yes, just out of nowhere.
Like, in the house with a bunch of kids being like, no, everything's ruined now.
Yeah. How do we feel about the significance of Bill talking to Paul about the football cards? Like, what did you take away from that?
That my heart melted into a million pieces.
Oh.
Oh, God, it was painful because, you know, I liked that they kind of did a dovetail, and it wasn't just, you know, oh, here I am with Bill all night, how annoying. You know, they were actually kind of bonding and having this moment, and then Bill was like, wait, let me get the football cards, I'll show you all of them. And he's just like blowing the dust off of them and making sure that Paul sees everyone that he pulls out, and Paul's just kind of sitting there like, please let me go home now.
It was funny, and then all of a sudden, right as Bill was about ready to pull out the third card, you can tell that he's sitting there thinking, this is probably the moment where I should gracefully get up and put these things back in the closet where they belong. But I'm going to pull out this third card.
I know.
I'm going to go for it. The expression on his face is like this mix of like, I really shouldn't do this, and just glee, just so much excitement and happiness that he's found this person who understands what he's into, finally understands his obsession after an episode spent feeling like no one understands him and no one wants his work and no one wants anything to do with him. And then he scuttles it by acting like Bill does, like an obsessive weirdo. And it's just this really lonely and sad, like it turns into this really sad thing because you think about how much work he had to go through to get this last card that he talks about, and what that must have been like as a child, you know, to want something for $5 to get this card that's so important to him.
And his friend who bowed out at the last minute.
Were you surprised to hear that Bill had friends as a child?
A little bit, but I also thought it kind of tied back nicely to what we've seen of Bill in the show, which is, you know, okay, he's not 100% incapable of making friends.
He's just a super weirdo.
Well, that and it's, you know, Counting Crows, Joni Mitchell, you don't know what you've got until it's gone. Yeah. So, like, you know, he had this good relationship with Barton that went to hell, and you know, he tried to make friends with Paul, and it was going fine at first, and then it just wasn't. Yeah. So I don't know. It was very poignant, though. Especially, I think, because it was so quiet. I feel like a lot of that, especially on TV, a lot of the scenes you see where it's like male friendship, it's just like either something dramatic is happening or, you know, they're just sitting there like shooting the shit. And so I kind of like that they gave a lot of time at this little moment. You want to go ahead and close this out?
Sure. If you have any questions for us or stuff that you'd like us to talk about in each episode, feel free to drop us a line at the Tumblr. We check it often. We're always interested to hear from people. And that'll close out our episode. Thanks for listening so much, and we'll be back sometime in the future. How long are you going to be gone for?
I'll be gone next week. So, you know, hopefully week after that.
Yeah, so we may combine the next two episodes, or we may skip one. It depends on, because I've been hearing intriguing things about Michael Sheen's comedic performance in the next episode.
Ooh. They're really utilizing all of his skills, aren't they?
They really are. He sings, he dances, he tells jokes. Bill's a jokester, he just doesn't know it. He's a funny dude.
Arouse your curiosity.
If nothing else.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.